to continue the conversations. There's lots of time at the end of the presentation built in for that. If you do have questions that come up as we're going, feel free to add those into the chat, and we can make sure that we touch on those when we get to the Q&A session. And without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. Like I said, I'm so thankful that you all are here with me today. I've been to several classes with AIU, and it's an honor to be back again. Today specifically, we're going to take a closer look at a powerful and really compassionate framework for understanding behavior using the lens of positive discipline, which I know I've mentioned in a couple of my other sessions as well. We actually had an entire class just on positive discipline in a Montessori classroom. This approach, if you weren't able to attend that class, to give you a little background, is developed by Dr. Jane Nelson. And Dr. Nelson invites us to really dig deeper, not just into what we can see, right? What's on the outside, what children are doing, what they're saying, but why they're doing and saying those things. And before we dive into all of that, I just want to share a little bit about me for anyone who might be new. My name is Heather White. I'm a former Montessori classroom teacher, administrator, and in-home caregiver with more than 15 years of experience in the world of Montessori. Right now, I'm working as an educational coach. I work in multiple roles with the Center for Guided Montessori Studies, including as their alumni, conference, webinar coordinator, an instructional guide supporting adult learners who are working to receive their Montessori certification, and as their accreditation associate. I'm also an adjunct professor at Sarasota University, which is the only accredited institution of higher education dedicated solely to Montessori. So that's very exciting. Aside from that, I enjoy writing blogs and developing content for different organizations, including the American Montessori Society. I hold certifications from AMS, the American Montessori Society, at the 3 to 6 and 6 to 9 age levels, but also have experience working with the age groups of 0 to 3, 9 to 12, and adolescent as well. I have a master's degree in education with a concentration in Montessori studies and an education specialist degree in school psychology. I have an anti-bias, anti-racist certificate from AMS, and I'm also a nationally certified school psychologist and nationally certified Montessori coach. So during our time together today, we're going to start by exploring the roots of positive discipline. We'll learn a little bit more about that philosophy that Dr. Jane Nelson developed. And then we'll learn how to identify what she calls the belief behind the behavior. And this is what's going to help us move from a place of control to a place of support. And then finally, we'll use that knowledge and the knowledge of one of my favorite tools, the mistake and goal chart, to help us better understand this code that children present to us, right? That we need to decipher in order to be able to support them more successfully. As I always do, or try to, I wanted to begin with a quote. This is a really powerful quote from Rudolf Dreikurs. Rudolf says that a misbehaving child is a discouraged child. So right from the start, this reminds us that what we often label as misbehavior might actually be a signal, an expression of really something deeper that's going on inside the child. And so rather than asking the question, how do I stop this behavior? We're invited with this approach to ask, why might this child be feeling this way? Why might they be feeling discouraged? And it's this shift in mindset that lays the foundation for everything that we're going to explore together today. Instead of focusing on correcting the behavior solely, we're going to look at how we can understand it, guide it, and support it by using things like connection, encouragement, and trust. So it's a much more proactive strategy, and then also gives some really powerful tools to use in those challenging moments as well. If we can do this, if we can see behavior as communication and really that discouragement as the root of this, what we're labeling misbehavior, then we can create environments where children feel really capable, valued, empowered, and that they have all the skills that they need to really thrive, which is my life's work, and I'm sure the life's work of all of you as well, something that we hold very dear as Montessorians. So let's get started and figure out how we do that. So, where did positive discipline come from? Positive discipline is grounded in the work of two early psychologists, Alfred Adler and Rudolf Dreikurs. Dr. Jane Nelson, who you also see there on the screen, built upon their theories to create a program that helps children become responsible and respectful and resourceful members of their communities. And this program is something that's used by parents, teachers, youth workers, really anyone who works with children and cares about building strong relationships with them. A lot of people hear this term positive discipline and think that it really means positive parenting, um, really just avoiding things like corporal punishment, right? Avoiding yelling at a child or avoiding spanking them. But it really is much more than that. It's a full mindset shift, one that goes from trying to avoid controlling a child's behavior and instead to teaching them skills, to building that connection with them, to nurturing the relationship so that they then are empowered to shift their behavior on their own. So rather than us shifting the behavior, we're empowering them, which again, that's what Montessori is all about, right? Is providing that autonomy and independence. We're empowering them to do that work themselves. And so positive discipline is really this overarching ideal that's grounded in the belief, and this is important, so tune into this. It's grounded in the belief that children are doing the best they can with the tools they have. And so, in those moments when you're feeling really triggered, really frustrated, when a child is talking back or refusing to do something that you ask, throwing a tantrum, right? I was a Montessori in home nanny. I remember those days of a 2-year-old laying on the floor because I gave her the wrong cup to drink her water out of, right? Things like that happen on a daily basis. But in those moments, we as the adults have to try to shift our mindset and remember that the child is doing the best they can with the tools that they have. And that helps us then pause, take a breath, and approach it a little differently, which really changes the entire dynamic. So, what makes discipline positive? How do we do this? Dr. J. Nelson outlines 5 key criteria that set positive discipline apart from other methodologies or other approaches. The first is that it is a kind and firm approach. So it's not permissive in the sense that we're allowing children to do whatever they want, to get away with whatever they want, right? That's not what we're saying at all. We're saying it's this balance between respecting the child and creating this mutual relationship, and that we're being firm, that we're holding those boundaries. Maria Montessori talked about it as freedom within limits. We have limits that are set that we ask the children and really ensure that the children are abiding within, right? Those are our rights and responsibilities we establish with them. That's what we call it in the classroom. And when that doesn't happen, then we're being firm about what those consequences might be. The second strategy or tool is that positive discipline helps children feel a sense of belonging. It helps them feel this sense of significance, that they matter. And that's really, again, the root of it, right? Is creating that relationship. So positive discipline focuses on the long-term outcome, not just getting obedience right in the moment. So here's a good example for you is that child is laying on the floor, throwing a tantrum, right? And let's say this time it's because they wanted to go to the park and it's raining. We could bribe them, right? We could bribe them with something to get them to stop throwing a tantrum in the moment. And maybe an easier one, it just came to my mind as I was saying that. It happens a lot. I know I've seen it multiple times. I've been there. You're in the store, you walk past a toy, something that the child wants, and they start having a temper tantrum when you say no. You could give in, you could give them the toy, right? That would be short term solving the problem. Or, right, in that sense, you might say, stop crying, you're not getting the toy. Again, short term obedience, but have we given them the long term skill to respond differently in the future? And that's what positive discipline is all about, is giving them the skills so that when you're in that situation or a similar situation in the future, they have the tools to respond differently. Another thing that positive discipline does is teaches essential life skills. So we're talking about how to get along with others, right? How to be a good citizen, what Maria Montessori called global citizen. So that's how we respond and relate to other people and the world that we live in. So positive discipline gets to the root of that and also encourages children to recognize their own capabilities. So again, it's about that autonomy, right? Helping children to feel empowered and inspired to know what they're capable of and to use it in really positive ways. One of the most powerful mindset shifts in positive discipline is this. Instead of asking, what do I need to do to get my child to behave? Ask, what does my child need from me to learn how to behave? So I'm going to repeat that again. So often we find ourselves thinking when we're in those challenging moments, the tantrum is happening, a child's talking back, they're refusing to do something we've asked. We think, what do I need to do to make it stop? What do I need to do to get them to listen? What do I need to do to get them to behave differently or the way that I want them to behave, right? And instead, we need to ask ourselves, what is it that the child needs, right? We're going with that mindset that the child is doing the best they can with the tools that they have. So, what can I do to help them learn those tools? What do they need from me to develop those skills so that they have that capability to behave differently? Misbehavior really is a form of communication. It's a discouraged child's way. Remember, we talked about that a misbehaving child is a discouraged child from Rudolf Dreikер's opinion. So that misbehavior is a form of communication. It's the discouraged child's way of saying, I need help. I'm looking for connection. I need that belonging. They're sending us a message, and we need to decode that message. We need to figure out what it is that they're asking us for. And that's where the belief behind the behavior comes in. So, positive discipline teaches that each child has a belief underlying their behavior. And if we only try to stop the behavior without addressing that underlying belief, we're likely going to miss an opportunity for lasting change. Meaning, we get that quick fix, right? They might be obedient in the moment, but the next time something happens that's similar, the same behavior is going to happen again, most likely, because they're still lacking those skills. They're still looking for that connection or belonging. So, for example, you have a family and a new baby is coming, or maybe a new baby was just born. Sometimes you see this in the picture there on the left. The younger sibling could even be 2 or 3. Interestingly enough, this continued happening with the family I was an in home Montessori caregiver for up until the time when I left, when the child was 4. The older sibling had this idea, as many older siblings do, that parents, in particular moms, most of the time, that mom loves the younger child more than they love them. And so when they're regressing, when that new sibling comes, or they're doing things that you haven't seen them do in such a long time, they're needing help with things that they didn't ask for help with before, that they developed independence with, the message that they're sending, that behavior is that communication, right? The message that they're sending, we need to decode. We need to figure out what it is that they're trying to tell us, which is, I don't feel loved. I'm looking for belonging. Make that connection with me so that I know you love me too, right? So that puts the onus on us. We have to do that work as the adults to figure out what that belief is behind or beyond the behavior. And I'm going to pause for just a moment. I'll leave this quote here on this screen so that you can read it and we'll dive in. But I did see a question come into chat and I didn't want to leave it too long. I think it came in right as we started. Um, I have a question of how we can relate with a student that is not comprehending during learning. She's not responding to learning. And that's a really good question. And I think that it's multifaceted. So, what I would encourage you to do, um, if you have been to other classes, I feel like I'm a broken record and I say this a lot because it is the root of my work as a Montessorian. And in my opinion, should be the root of all that we do as adults who live with and work with children, and really with anyone, is to observe. Because the only way, just like with what we're talking about with behavior, the only way we get more information about what's happening and what someone else needs in this situation, what is it that the child needs to help them comprehend? The only way we're going to figure that out is through observation, spending time, stepping back, watching what's happening. So when you're giving a lesson, right? When you're presenting a lesson, and this might require you asking someone else to observe during that time, or you observing someone else presenting a lesson to the child. Maybe you could record and go back and watch it later. But really, what happens when you're presenting that information with that child? Do they appear distracted, right? Are they looking somewhere else? Are you asking questions to affirm their comprehension throughout the lesson? That would help you understand, were they focusing or were they distracted? So what I'm getting at is, it could be something with their focus, right? It could be something executive function related that they're having trouble tuning into what you're saying. It might be if you're presenting something only auditorily, right? You're only speaking to the child. Maybe they learn differently. Maybe they're a kinesthetic learner and they need to move. They need to touch something. Maybe they need it more concrete. That's why in Montessori we have all these beautiful materials, is because it makes concepts that are abstract more concrete. It speaks to multi-sensory approach to learning that so many of us, right, not just children, even us as adults, so many of us need. I can, speak from experience as an adult. If I'm sitting and listening to someone talk for an hour, I pick things up differently than if there were activities in a session, or I was able to be involved in some way, right? And that's me as a learner. You might be very different. And it's the same with children. And so observing is going to help us understand, is it a different type of learning that that child needs? Is there challenges with their focusing? I would also encourage you to talk to the parents. Sometimes things that are at the root of a lot of challenges children have with learning are sleep and diet. So I always encourage people to, especially educators, to talk with families and make sure those things are appropriate. I had a child that had a really hard time focusing at a certain period of the morning, and we figured out what was happening. He was eating a really sugary breakfast and his blood sugar was dropping, and he needed something to replenish, right? To reset his body at a specific time. And as long as we set that timer and he had snack before then, he was great and he was able to attend and do his work. So observe, 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 and try to figure out what it is that might be causing some of those challenges. Because again, the child is communicating something to you through that behavior, and it's our job as the adult to figure out what it is that the child is communicating. All right, so here we have a quote from Chantal Montford. And I wanted to take a moment, and I've had it on the screen, so I've given you that moment to kind of sit with this beautiful reflection from Chantal. She says, behavior is not the problem. Our interpretation of it is. Behavior is a mirror, a message, a nervous system, a story that hasn't found words yet. Children are not trying to push our buttons, they're showing us where theirs are. And I think that's really powerful. I've heard the phrase, right? Children aren't giving you a hard time, they're having a hard time. And that's what this is getting at. They're not trying to push our buttons, they're not trying to frustrate us, they're not trying to give us a hard time. They're really showing us what is difficult for them. And when we see behavior through this lens, it becomes less about stopping the behavior and more about understanding it. It's really more person centered. Each action, each reaction is a clue to what is happening beneath the surface for this child. Remember, that behavior is communication, but it's often a coded communication, right? We talked about deciphering the code, figuring out what's going on and what the child is really trying to tell us, because they don't always have the words to explain what they feel or what they need. Maybe they don't have the vocabulary yet. Maybe they're too flooded with emotion to reach that thinking part of their brain to express it. So instead, they speak with their behavior. And our role, like I've said, is to be the code breaker, to listen, to observe. See, I told you I would say that again, and I say it all the time. To listen, to observe, and to really unlock those stories that they're trying to tell us. So, how do we do that, right? It sounds kind of challenging to decipher a code, right? I think about like the CSI and things like that. It really isn't that complicated. It takes time, it takes practice, it requires that we be in a place that we can do that work, which means we have to be well rested. We need to be well nourished. We need to be taking time for self care so that we approach these challenging moments with a state of calm and a state of peace, because children are co-regulating through us. So if we are escalated, they're going to become more escalated. The good news is that positive discipline gives us the tools that we need to do this. It gives us the tools we need to break the code. We need to start by noticing our own feelings. That's the first clue. Pause and think about how you're feeling in the moment. Then look at how you typically respond. What do you usually do when the child behaves this way or you're feeling this way? Then we examine the child's behavior. So it starts with us. And again, I feel really passionately about this as a Montessorian because Maria Montessori talks so much about the need to look inside ourselves and to look at the environment that the child is within and make changes there before we look at changing something with the child. Because often it's about the way we're responding or something within the space that they're in that is triggering that response. And they're trying to tell us through the code, they're trying to tell us that, but they don't have the words. So start within yourself, examine how you're feeling, look at how you typically respond, then examine the child's behavior. And when you piece those clues together, you can start to discover the belief behind their behavior, the belief behind that action or those words. And then you're empowered to respond with encouragement instead of control. So this is the mistaken goal chart. When a child misbehaves, like we've said so many times already, even just today, it's that sign they're feeling discouraged, right? Deep down, all of us as humans have the same fundamental need, which is to feel like we matter, to feel a sense of belonging and significance. But unfortunately, sometimes, I was going to say children, but all of us, even as adults, right? We find misguided ways to meet that need. And that's what's outlined here in the mistaken goal chart. This is a key element of that positive discipline system that was developed by Dr. Jay Nelson. Without the right insight from us as adults, the code breakers, right? Without that insight, a child's attempt to connect backfires because it leaves them feeling even more disconnected. So, our first clue, like I was saying, is our emotional reaction to a child's behavior. Our feelings can help us uncover what the child's mistaken belief is about how they can go about finding connection and significance. So, for example, I want you to look here in the first column, and we're looking, or in the first row, and we're looking at column 2. If the parent or teacher feels. So, if you are feeling irritated, annoyed, guilty, then the child may be seeking, their goal may be undue attention. They're seeking that connection. They're looking to get some kind of special service, to spend time with you or someone else, right? In this case, their belief, we can look in column 5 here, their belief behind their behavior is that they only matter when they're being noticed or when they're receiving some kind of special treatment. They feel that they're valuable if you keep your focus on them. So we start with how we're feeling. And then, like I said, our next step is to look at column 3, how we tend to react. So you're thinking, okay, yes, I'm feeling irritated. I'm feeling annoyed. I'm feeling guilty. So now I need to look and see, how do I respond to the behavior? These are common responses that we as adults have that unintentionally reinforce that child's discouragement. So, for instance, let's say a child keeps interrupting you while you're speaking, and your response is to become annoyed, irritated, right? And you scold them. They'll stop briefly, right? We've gotten that immediate obedience. And that's another clue that we're on the right track, right? Because we're thinking, this is how I'm feeling, this is what I'm doing. The behavior stops temporarily, right? In column 4, this shows you what the child's response is. And so if that happens, our scolding, although well-intentioned, really just validated this belief in column 5. We've told the child, without intending to do so, that the only way to get our attention, the only way to seek that connection is to demand it. And so what's going to happen is they'll likely repeat that behavior, right? Only more intensely this time, because if it worked last time, if it's a little more intense next time, maybe I get more connection and more attention. And so when we put these clues together of how we feel, how we tend to react, and then what the child's response is, what they do next, we can start to begin to understand that belief behind the behavior. And from there, we can offer encouragement that really supports the child. So in this case of undue attention in row 1, what the child really needs, this is their coded message, right? We're trying to decipher that code, break that code. What they really need is to be noticed and to be involved usefully. So, for instance, let's say there's a mother who realized that her daughter always interrupts her when she gets on the telephone, right? She's on the phone talking to someone, her daughter always interrupts. Instead of responding and being frustrated, right? Because I would probably be annoyed and irritated if someone continuously did that to me, right? And so we respond by reminding the child, don't interrupt me when I'm on the phone. And the behavior stops temporarily, but it just continues and usually more intense the next time, right? Just like we've already talked about. Instead of doing that, instead of reminding and acting with frustration, if instead we redirected the child before we got on the phone by involving her in a helpful activity, right? Something like, um, I noticed that the counter is really dirty. I have a phone call. Do you think that you could wipe the countertops off for me while I'm on the phone? And when I'm done, I'll come help you and we'll finish it together. So I've given that opportunity to connect. I've given her a useful task, or you could say something like, and this is in, it might be a little hard to see, but this is in the sixth column. These are the more empowering responses we can use. And there's one there that says plan special time. So instead, I could say, Susie, I have a phone call, but I will only be 5 minutes. And when the phone call is over, we can sit down and play together. So now Susie knows I don't need to interrupt to be noticed. I don't need to interrupt to get that connection because as soon as the phone call is over, I'm going to get it, right? They know they can expect it. And so they come to settle into that and feel that sense of belonging, that sense of peace. For younger children who have a harder time with a concept of time, you might have to use some kind of visual timer, like a time timer, so they can see when this is over, mom's going to come back and we're going to play together. Because otherwise it can feel a little unsettling and you may still see some of that response. But what happened is the mother provided that attention that the child was craving in a positive, constructive way. And so the behavior changed. And so that's what this mistaken goal chart is all about, is helping us break that code. There's an updated version of this. I couldn't find a larger chart to show, but there's an updated version that actually puts column 2 first. And the reason for that is because that's where you need to begin, right? I said we need to start by looking inward and assessing how we're feeling. So we start in column 2, and then we confirm with column 3. If we're feeling this way, is the child reacting in these ways, or are we reacting, I'm sorry, in these ways? And then are these the child's responses? If those 3 things are true, then the child's goal is likely what's shown here in the first column, and the belief behind their behavior is likely what's in column 5. Then we can figure out how we're contributing to that mistaken belief, what the child is really trying to tell us in column 7, the coded message, and then how we can respond in a more empowering way. So these are really our strategies to change the way we're responding or to change the environment to give the child the strategies and tools that they need to behave differently, right? I saw lots of things coming in the chat, so I'm going to check the chat here. Yes, I do see your request to make it visible. It was hard to do that with a PDF in the slide deck. This was as large as I could make it, but what I'm going to do, if someone will remind me, because I do have a habit of forgetting, but when I finish the slideshow, what I'll do is put the PDF and the link where you can dive deeper into the chat so that you're able to really make it as large as you need to explore that. And it looks like that's what most of it was, is that it was hard to see it. You can click on the table above this screen. So the only table I'm seeing on my screen, or the only thing I'm seeing, is the X to go out of the screen because I'm within the presentation mode. But I promise I will get it to you all so that you have it. So what we're really saying is that as adults, a lot of us don't realize that every behavior, and again, I was going to say that a child exhibits or shows, but really every behavior that anyone shows is rooted in an underlying belief. And because of that, as adults, without that understanding, we often focus only on trying to stop the behavior itself. But if we want that real lasting change, then what we have to do is address the belief that's driving the behavior, right? That belief behind or beyond the behavior. When we break that code, then we start to see the child's discouraging belief, right? That belief that they have that's not necessarily true, but what's guiding their behavior. And then we understand what they really need from us in order to feel supported and motivated so that they can shift that belief. And once they shift the belief that's underlying, then their behavior changes, right? Then they have the capability, because we've empowered them, they have the ability autonomously to make changes to the way they're behaving. So every action stems from a belief. Um, However, when an adult uh, responds to a child that acts out, we often only correct that visible behavior, right? We're not addressing that root belief. We're not ignoring the behavior when we address it. It just means that we're not being as effective as we could be if we recognize and respond to both. So I wanted to really highlight here at the end that it doesn't mean you're doing it wrong if you're only addressing the behavior that you see, but this is just a set of tools to give you additional strategies to be even more effective in how you're responding to others, particularly children, because it's that combination of understanding the behavior and the belief behind it that is going to lead to real growth and change, because that's what fosters that sense of connection. That's what builds those relationships, that sense of belonging that we all crave as human beings. So, as I often do as well, I wanted to end our time together with some additional quotes to serve as some inspiration as we move forward in this work of helping to meet the needs of children. So, the first is from Fred Rogers. And Fred Rogers reminds us there's usually an inside story to every outside behavior. Though we may not be able to know that inside story, there's generally some inner reason for what children do. And so this quote reminds us that all behavior, especially that from children, is really just that form of communication we talked about, right? So when we see a child acting out, or when they're withdrawing or behaving in ways that challenge us, it's easy to just focus on what we see, to just focus on the behavior. But behind every action is a belief, like we've discussed, a feeling, an unmet need. So, as educators, as caregivers, as parents, it's essential that we shift from asking what's wrong with this child to what might be happening with this child. Even if we don't have all the answers, that pausing, that leading with curiosity and compassion opens the door to understanding and building that connection and creating that support. Fred Rogers really reminds us with this quote that we're whole people, right? We each have a story. And while we might not always be able to see that inside story from others, we need to know that it's there and to try to respond accordingly by being empathetic, by showing respect, even to children. They're human beings and deserve respect as well. And we need to have this desire to understand and connect rather than control. And only because it was so powerful, I added one more. So I invite you to hold this image in your heart as you leave our time together today. When a child is struggling, when their behavior really challenges us, it's not the child who needs fixing, right? We talked about that. It's us, it's the environment, it's the relationship, it's the unmet need that we have yet to see that needs fixing. And it's that mindset shift that invites us to lead with that curiosity and that compassion that we just talked about with Fred Rogers' quote, right? To be supportive, not punitive. It's this quote from Chantal Mountford really speaks to the heart of Montessori and respectful education and parenting. She says that what we call misbehavior is often just the resistance to a system that doesn't see the soul of the child. And when we view behavior as communication, right, when we shift our view to see the unmet need or the voice that's unheard, the soul that's unseen, as Chantal says, then we really start to change everything. So I invite you to hold that image in your heart and really focus on trying to see the soul of the child, so that you're able to respond differently and therefore change their relationship. And I would even say change the world, right? Because if we change our relationships, we have the power to change everything. I wanted to give you some helpful resources if you wanted to continue learning about these strategies and to give you some ideas for practical application. So that mistaken goal chart we looked at, which I'll share in just a moment, there's lots of different versions for children at different ages, different types of needs. There's a version specifically for neurodiverse children. Um, Offering some more nuanced language and supports that are inclusive of their experiences. Jane Nelson refers to it as um, positive discipline for children with special needs. There's also a specific version for ages 0 to 3 for early childhood that's designed with developmentally appropriate behaviors and responses for our youngest children. In addition to those charts, the positive discipline approach is supported by a host of books for specific audiences. There is that positive discipline for children with special needs, positive discipline for 0 to 3. I think it's positive discipline for early childhood. There's some for teens, for classroom groups, families. And for those of you who are specifically interested in Montessori, this is an incredible book. Dr. Jane Nelson co-authored with Montessori and Chip DiLorenzo and really applied these strategies to Montessori specifically. So there's really just this beautiful connection between Montessori philosophy and positive discipline tools. And so this book offers really practical strategies that align with the Montessori values of respect, independence, and connection, which we talked about so much today. So you already can see how they're connected. And I will open it up to questions now. I'll share those mistaken goal charts in the chat with you. And before questions start, I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining me again today. Or if this was your first class, thank you for being here. And I hope you all learned a lot of really useful information about how to look beyond behaviors to really try to figure out what children's underlying unmet needs are and to really foster that connection and belonging, to change your relationships. And like I said, to change the world. And I'll also share my contact information in the chat for anyone who has unanswered questions after today's session.